I'm really excited to be here today. This has been something that we've really worked hard on. It is a sensitive issue. I put up statistics, and up to a third of Australia's children will suffer some form of sexual abuse before their 18th birthday. I don't know why that isn't on the news every night. We hear about how many people die in car accidents and how many children drown, but when a third of Australia's children will suffer some form of sexual abuse, between 5 and 10% suffering some form of really extreme abuse, we need to be talking about this. So I'm hoping that today will be a catalyst of changing the way people talk about this. Children with special needs are up to 7 times more likely to be sexually abused than mainstream children. Now, my background is I was a teacher assistant working in a special school. Protected behaviours was developed in the late 70s and came to Australia in the late 80s in the place of stranger danger. And so even before it came, I was at a special school and we knew our children were far more at risk. So in the early 80s, we were teaching public and private. And I hate to say, and it still remains to this day to be one of the best resources ever made, Rolf Harris made the most amazing resource. And it seems ironic now, but up until the day he was named, I was still using this resource because it was brilliant. But we always knew that our kids were more at risk. So I had always taught protected behaviours, and then I was at a school where there was a critical incident where a bus aide was sexually abusing kids on the special needs bus. And we were one of the first schools in Western Australia trained. So for the last 30 years, I've always been teaching children that I've worked with abuse prevention. But in 2007, I went up into 2 remote communities in the Kimberley after it was all over the front page of the West Australian in my long service leave. And from there, I just saw a huge need for resources. So I quit my job, took a huge loan out of my home, and have been doing it full time ever since. So I'm going to walk you through the program, but I want to also give you the voice of what children are saying to me. For the last at least 5 years, I've stood in front of between 3,500 and 4,500 children across Australia and taught some part of this program too. And in just the last 2 months, at the beginning of this year, I have stood in front of 2,000 children already this year. So I want to give those children a voice because people are making decisions for children without asking children. And if we ask children, they have the solutions. But we need to start talking to children more. So the only other statistic I'm going to share is 1 in 7 victims are under the age of 6 years of age. So I've just currently written a curriculum for early years because I believe that we need to start teaching abuse prevention education when children are 3. So I've designed this program for childcare centres so that early years educators can empower 3-year-olds. And I had to do this because I was being invited into childcare centres where children were touching other children, but it was a lot more than just you show me yours, I'll show you mine, which is normal behaviour for children. It was in fact digital penetration and oral sex with small children. So I saw a huge need for resources and have written this whole package. So I've stopped calling it protected behaviours because protected behaviours was designed in the 70s in America, came to Australia in the late 80s, but we don't have a world like that anymore. You know, with technology now, children, their whole world, you know, when I was a child, bullying stopped when you went through the front door, but now it's 24/7. So I call it protective education because it encompasses cyberbullying. It's so much more than just what the original program was. Our program is still based on the original program, but because of my experience working with children, I've had to really ramp up the resources, unfortunately. So the benefits for teaching it: we need to give all children, and especially boys, words for their feelings. Why is it a 2-year-old can say the F word in context? Because they hear the F word in context. And yet when I'm standing in front of children asking them to name feelings, happy, sad, angry and scared, there's only 4. And in fact, in the English language, I think there's nearly 2,000 feelings words. So we need to give children those feelings words. We need to model it for them. I don't know if you've all seen, but they're now building potties with iPad holders on them. I mean, I've got a picture if you want to see it. So children aren't hearing, oh, I'm so proud of you, you've done a poo. They're just sitting there going, So children aren't being spoken to, they aren't hearing these words. So we need to give them feelings words. We need to help them be more assertive, feel secure and build their self-esteem. The two things that I'm most passionate about this program, the first is persistence. We need to teach children to keep on telling. Children may tell a parent just by saying, oh, I don't want to go to that person's house. And the parent says, get in the car, running late. Well, actually, that might have been an attempt at disclosure. So we need to teach children if they feel unsafe, if something's worrying them, they have to keep on telling. And we need to give them problem-solving skills. I know I'm not telling you anything new here, but nowadays children are not resilient because they're not learning to risk on purpose and things like that. So this is all the language that children will get during this program. So it has two themes. We all have the right to feel safe all of the time. We teach them safe and unsafe. Now this safe and unsafe, whenever I'm working with children, I use a lot of sign language. And so I would teach, a group of 4-year-olds safe and unsafe. And I was in a remote community in the Northern Territory, and on the Monday I taught the 4-year-olds safe and unsafe. That afternoon, there were 2 big kids up on the roof, and here are the 4-year-olds going, get down off there, unsafe, after one lesson. On the Thursday, I go down to the clinic and show the doctor and the nurses safe and unsafe. And one of the nurses goes, oh, thank goodness for that. She'd been immunising the 4-year-olds, and they're sitting on the bed going, and nobody knew what they were saying after one lesson. So children, once they know it, they just use the language, and that's what we need them to do, because that alone could be a protective factor. What we're trying to do is give children some tools. It is ridiculous to think that children can keep themselves safe. But for me, children are the last line of defence. We need parents looking out for children. We need the community keeping kids safe. But kids need to know this stuff. And lots of people say, oh, but you're taking away children's innocence. No. When bad things happen to children, that takes away their innocence. Knowledge is power. It's not frightening. And the children just learn it really quickly and use it straight away, which is, people say, Holly, this is too simple to work. No, it works because it's simple. So then we would talk about safe and unsafe touches. Now, I've also introduced confused. So we teach this for safe, this for unsafe, and then confused is in the middle because you're not quite sure if you're safe and you're not quite sure if you're unsafe. And I was in a school just recently and a child in grade 2, so 7 years of age, put up his hand and said, so Holly, would a confusing touch be when somebody you love bashes you? Well, yeah, mate, I could see how someone, because that's the other thing about the program. Everything is always done in the third person. Of course, it's not happening to you. It possibly is. So to protect all children, everything is always done in the third person. So I could say to him, yes, well, if that was happening to someone, then that someone would need to go and tell somebody, and I could walk him through all the ways to disclose without any other child in the room catching on that that might have been happening for him. We need to give children words for their feelings. The program was designed in the beginning as a sexual abuse prevention program, but I just say it's just a good life skills program. It's a bullying prevention program. It's a suicide prevention program. Because if you're a young child that's been taught to talk about their feelings and you have a safety team of 5 adults that you can go to, then hopefully less of our young people will be taking their own lives. If you're an empowered child, you won't be bullied. If, it's also a drug prevention program because, again, by empowering children, hopefully they will make safer choices. We teach safety in a continuum. So at one end we've got safe and the other end we've got unsafe. But the most important part of this continuum is this formula at the bottom. To feel safe, you need to have either a choice, there needs to be some kind of control, or there needs to be a time limit on it. You don't need all of them to feel safe, but you at least need one of them. So we have risking on purpose, which are things like going on a roller coaster ride or watching a scary movie, but the emphasis on fun. And then for me, out of all 4 categories, risking on purpose is the most important. We need children to be risk takers, but we need them to do it safely. How many of you played on a trampoline when you were a child? How many of you had a net around your trampoline when you were a child? And you all survived. It's a miracle, isn't it? I don't understand why we have nets around trampolines. We need children breaking their arms. I know you don't want that as a parent, but we have to. I'm all for you tell a 2-year-old, don't touch the cup of tea, it's hot. don't touch the cup of tea. It's hot. They have to touch the cup of tea. And I was saying this at a parent workshop, and a parent came up afterwards and said, Holly, you're so right. When my son was 2, I wouldn't let him touch my cup of tea. But when he was 4, we went camping, and he has stuck his hand on a hot plate, because how do you know what hot is if you haven't experienced it? Now, if a 2-year-old touches a cup of tea, it won't burn itself badly, but it'll learn the lesson. So we need children to be risk takers and to do it safely. So this choice control time limit is so important. Because if there are children in schools that are living with family violence, going to school without breakfast or lunch, being bullied or being sexually abused, they don't have a choice about it. They're not in control, but it's the last one. They think this is going to happen to them forever and ever. So we really need to embed choice control time limit with children. Early warning signs is another important part of the program. Have you ever had somebody stand next to you in a crowd and you've gone, ooh, there's something about them I just don't like? As adults, we would call it gut feeling or intuition, but children really understand when we call them early warning signs. They can tell us how animals show their early warning signs. And so there's lots of different activities that we'll get to give the children, you know, the feeling of what they're like. Many teachers have had the experience where they've just gone to put their hand on a child's shoulder and the child's flinched. So perhaps children that live with family violence are living with these early warning signs all the time, and they really understand this lesson. So there's, again, lots of different activities that we would do, teaching them about their early warning signs. At the end of this excites teachers. At the end of the lesson, I teach the children the difference between telling and dobbing. We tell kids don't dob all the time, but we've never linked it to anything. By linking it to their early warning signs, they really get it. So dobbing is telling on someone to get them into trouble. Telling is because they feel unsafe. So I'll have kids, once they've learnt this, come up to me and go, Holly, that kid's not eating their lunch. And I go, oh my gosh, tell me about your early warning signs. Where in your body are you feeling that? And they wander off going, no, I'm just dobbing. And they get it. And I started teaching this to children in this way because I have taught this all over Australia and in Cambodia. And whenever I ask children, do adults always listen to kids? Without a word of a lie, and even in Khmer very clearly, children say no. And I think a lot of it's got to do with mums get sick of mum, and teachers definitely get sick of miss. So if we can get kids to stop dobbing on each other and get adults to start listening to children, perhaps that's a way of helping them to feel safe. Now, to be honest, this is probably my most valuable resource that I've created. This simple poster, all I have to do is put this up on the board and the kids do the lesson for me. We talk about why this child feels unsafe, and the children will say, oh, miss, maybe his family are fighting, his parents are drunk, they stole the ball, he's got no friends, his grandma died. Children come up with a million reasons why this child feels unsafe. And I'll say, just because I happen to choose a boy, it could easily be a girl. So why might girls feel unsafe? And I had a boy in grade 4 recently go, oh, she thinks she's fat. Where does that come from? Nobody's fat in grade 4. What is that about? But I put this up at a school north of the river. I have put it up on the board. I have 50 14-year-olds in my lesson. I put the poster up. I turn around and a young fella's got his hand up. And I said, mate, I normally ask you some questions, I give you some information, then you ask questions. That's how it works. And he said, no, miss, I've got a question now. Now he's 14. And I said, okay, go on then. He said, miss, why do so many women like anal sex? I have been in the class less than 2 minutes and he's prepared to ask me that. And I said, well, I'm going to answer that for you. But before I do, how many of you young men have had sex? And they're all going, well, none of us, we haven't even kissed a girl yet. So how do you know that? Oh, because of all the porn, hey. And they're nudging each other. All the porn we're watching. Now, these young men were describing the most heinous acts, and I will not traumatise you with what they were describing to me, but they just talked so openly about it, but all they could say was, oh, but miss, it's just so funny. Next to ICE and DV, pornography is our country's 3rd biggest problem and nobody wants to talk about it. We were supposed to have a Senate inquiry into the effects of porn on children. last year. But what happened was our government called an election, so it got shelved. And then they were taken down and a report was made, not a Senate inquiry, because the senators are too busy. So a report was put up and there were only 4 recommendations. Now, in our submission, we had 4 recommendations. And what our 4 was, I believe that we need to have better sex education. Because when I ask young fellas, why would you look at that stuff? Or to learn technique, miss, to learn style. That's not technique and there's no style there. So we need good respect for relationship stuff. They don't realise that that's not normal. We need to follow the UK model where if you buy a device, it's locked. If you want to watch those things, then you have to unlock it. I believe that we need to have a proper national survey. Now, that was one of the recommendations, but I think they're only going to be looking at 12 to 18-year-olds in the national survey to see how big the problem is. I'm not concerned about those children. I want to know how many 3 and 4-year-olds, because I know how many 3 and 4-year-olds are seeing it. Most children are coming across these images on YouTube. Now, YouTube actually, I looked it up the other day, I hadn't realised, it's actually for 17 plus when you download the app. But just before Christmas, I had a mum telling me how her 3-year-old was sitting on the bench watching Christmas clips on YouTube while she's cooking the dinner, and her 3-year-old has clicked on something about Santa's sack, and there were no toys in Santa's sack. So how is a 3-year-old supposed to process that? People don't understand that kids can come across pornographic images quite by accident. Does anybody know the average age of children knowingly going to look for porn? 10. That's knowingly, but it's not to say that kids much younger aren't seeing it. So we need to do it. And then I believe we need to have a national ad campaign to alert parents to the problem. So we help them have a safety team of 5 adults. Now, I've called it a safety team because originally it was called a network, but that's quite an adult concept. But safety team makes so much more sense when you're 3. We teach them, so you have 5 people on your safety team, and if the first person doesn't listen, you have to keep telling. We teach public and private as a whole concept, and in here is where I talk about pornography. I had to write a book, and I don't call it porn with children, I call them private pictures or private movies, but I had to write a book about it because so many children are seeing it. We teach them that they can say no about personal space and strangers, but not that we're advocating stranger danger, because it isn't strangers that are doing this to children. It's people that they know and love and trust usually. We talk about secrets, and we teach that there are good safe secrets and bad unsafe secrets. A good secret is kept for a short time, but if somebody wants to keep a bad secret, they want to keep it for a lifetime. I also had to create a resource talking about, I call them secret enablers, because this is also what's used to keep children quiet. They might trick them, lie to them, use bribes, threat, guilt, shame, conning, and humbugging is a word they'd use up in the Kimberley, which just means pestering. When I'm invited into a lot of remote communities, and it's usually after, especially in the Northern Territory, it's usually after there's been a critical incident and the police have gone out and taken the interview, and they say to the principal, you need to get Holly in. She's the only person in Australia that can help you with this problem. And so I won't go in if I'm just working with children. It's a whole community approach. And one of the things that I'm most proud of is I've run 45 workshops now with solely Aboriginal men. And I want to just walk you quickly through how I teach them about receiving a disclosure. I had nearly 40 men at a workshop in a remote community after football training this is on the Wednesday night before grand final, so if you know about football in the Northern Territory, it's a big deal. So the men have rocked up after training, and at the end of my talk, I've chosen a guy who was having a bit of a joke with me. And I said to him, would you help me out? I want you to pretend to be my dad. I'm going to pretend to be your 9-year-old daughter. And I've gone up and said, Dad, that boy next door, he been touching me down there. He been touching my vagina. And this guy worked beautifully. And he's gone, oh, excuse my language, oh, fucking kill him. Oh, rip his head off. And he's gone acting really well. And I said, now, fellas, if you do that to your baby, you'll stop your baby telling you that story. You need to say, I'm glad you told me. I believe you, and it's not your fault. We need to teach people how to take a disclosure from children. I said to the men, afterwards you go out bush, you do whatever you'd have to do to let that anger out, but you can't show that to your child because you'll stop your child. I don't want my dad going to jail. And the men are just sitting there going, we get it, Holly. Now the men, I have more men to my workshops than women, and the men are so grateful and they say, Holly, we like you because you tell us straight away, you don't bullshit us. And they're our kids too, and we need to know this stuff. So it has to be a whole community working with children to keep them safe. Thank you.